is Walter Sinclair. I'm 54 years old, and I own a vineyard. Most people drive right past without knowing it's still standing. 150 acres off Trinity Road, Sonoma County, California. Hillside blocks of Zinfandel my grandfather planted with his own hands. A few rows of Cabernet my father added in the 70s, and a narrow strip of Pinot Noir, down by the creek where the fog sits longest in the morning. The tasting room used to be open 6 days a week. Now it's open 3, because I can't run the pours and the cash register and the cellar all by myself, and I won't hire someone just to fill a chair my wife used to sit in. Diane died 4 years ago this past spring. A stroke. Sudden, the kind that doesn't give you time to say anything you meant to say. She used to run our wine club out of the barrel room behind the crush pad, kept her reading chair in there, a clipboard hanging on a nail with harvest dates written in her own hand, the ink gone soft and gray with age. I haven't opened that door since the funeral. I tell myself there's nothing in there I need. The truth is, I'm afraid of exactly how much I'd still find. I wake at 5, same as I always have. Coffee in the same chipped mug. I walk the rows before the sun's fully up, checking for mildew, checking the drip lines, checking nothing in particular, except whether the silence has swallowed me whole yet. I prune alone now. I used to hand Diane the loppers, and she'd tell me I was leaving too much wood on the spurs. Nobody tells me that anymore. Most nights I eat standing at the kitchen counter, plate in one hand, because sitting down at a table built for 2 felt like a complaint I didn't have the right to make. That's how most Thursdays went, until they didn't. It was the second week of October, the kitchen window still fogged from the cold, when somebody knocked. Not the tasting room bell, the back door, the one only neighbors use. Hannah Reyes stood on my porch in boots caked with red clay from her own grove. A paper bag folded over at the top. A glass bottle of olive oil tucked under one arm like she'd carried it that way 100 times before. First press. He said, holding the bag out before I'd even said good morning. Bread's still warm if you eat it now. I took it without much of an answer. I never asked her why she kept coming. 2 weeks after Diane's funeral, she'd shown up the same way, said almost nothing, left before I could thank her properly. By the 3rd Thursday, I'd stopped pretending I didn't need it. I never told her this, but somewhere around the 5th or 6th visit, I caught myself listening for her truck before I even heard the gravel under the tires. That was the first thing in 4 years that hadn't sounded like silence. 2 weeks after the funeral was when it started. I remember because I hadn't shaved in 11 days, and the casseroles from the church ladies had finally stopped coming, and Etna was standing in the driveway at 7 in the morning with a dead truck battery and no particular reason to fix it, when Hannah's old Tacoma came rattling up the gravel and stopped at the gate. She didn't say she was sorry for my loss. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She just handed me a paper sack through the window and said, "You can't run a vineyard on coffee alone." And then she backed out and drove home before I'd even looked inside. There was bread in it. Bread in a small jar of oil, the kind she presses herself from the trees. Her father planted, 20 years back, before he passed and left her the whole 40 acres on her own. She never asked for help running that grove. She never took on a partner, never took a loan she didn't pay off early. And twice now she's turned down outside money. Once from a packaging company out of Petaluma, once from some venture group in the city that wanted to put her oil in airport gift shops. She told me about the second one over the porch rail, like she was reporting the weather. Said she didn't want her father's trees turned into a logo. That's the kind of woman who started showing up on Thursdays. Never long, never asking. Just leaving something behind and driving off, like she hadn't done anything worth mentioning. It was the second week of October, the morning still carrying that thin gray light Sonoma gets before the sun burns through, when I made the mistake of saying out loud what I'd been thinking for longer than I want to admit. We were on the porch. She'd brought a bottle from her new harvest, first pressing, still cloudy. The way good oil is before it settles. I dipped a piece of bread in it and didn't say anything. Sit there, peppery, back of my throat the way fresh oil does, you know. The kind of thing a man says when he's trying to make a compliment sound smaller than it is. In another life, I'd have married a woman like you. I expected her to roll her eyes, maybe laugh it off, tell me to finish my breakfast, get back across the fence line to her goats. She didn't do any of that. She set the bottle down on the rail, slow, deliberate, like she needed both hands free for what she was about to say. "This is that life," she said. No smile, no softness around it to make it easier to hear. Just those 4 words, flat and certain, like she'd already turned them over in her head 100 times before she ever said them out loud to me. Then she walked back across the property line, without waiting to see what I'd do with it. I stood there a long time after her truck pulled out, the bread going stale in my hand. I told myself I'd misheard the weight of it. I told myself a lot of things that morning that didn't hold up by noon. By the time I got out to the upper block to pull suckers off the Cabernet, I wasn't paying attention to my own hands. I sliced my thumb open on the second cane I touched, a clean line just below the knuckle, blood running thin and quick down into the dirt. I stood there holding it, watching the vine I'd been about to clean, and thought, this is that life, like the words had decided to live in my head, whether I wanted them there or not. It was Pete who put the rest of it together for me, though he didn't mean to. Pete Alvarez has worked this place since, before I took it over from my father, 61 years old, hands like dried leather, doesn't say much unless it matters. I found him checking the drip emitters down by the creek block, that same afternoon, my thumb wrapped in a rag, because I hadn't bothered going inside for a real bandage. "You eat that bread Hannah Reyes brought?" he asked, not looking up from the line he was clearing. "Every Thursday," I said. He grunted, moved to the next emitter. 20-some years I've worked this place, and I've never once seen that woman carry bread anywhere but here. He said it the way he said everything, like a fact about soil pH, nothing more. But it sat in me different than the joke on the porch had. It wasn't a guess anymore. It was a thing somebody else had watched happen, season after season, without me ever once asking why. I didn't have time to sit with that, before the next thing came along, the way it always does in a town, small enough that everybody's business gets passed around before lunch. Saturday morning, Glen Ellen Farmers Market, the kind of crisp fall day, where the oak leaves are just starting to turn at the edges. Hannah had her folding table, set up same as always. Jars lined in neat rows, a hand-lettered sign that just said, "Right Grove. Cold Progressed." I was 2 stalls down buying peppers when I saw Ethan Cole leaning against his truck near her table, like he owned the sidewalk under it. 29 years old, clean boots that had never seen a vineyard floor, the Cole name stitched right there on his jacket. His father runs 14 grocery stores across the county, and Ethan had clearly been sent, or had come on his own, which was somehow worse, to make Hannah an offer. "We could have your oil on shelves in every Kohl's location by spring," I heard him say, easy and confident, the kind of voice that's never had to ask twice for anything. "You'd never have to ship another bottle out of your own kitchen again." Hannah said something back I didn't catch, but she didn't look impressed, and that was the only thing that kept me standing where I was, instead of walking over. I didn't have to wonder what the town thought about it. I heard that part for myself an hour later at the feed store. 2 old-timers by the fertilizer bags who didn't bother lowering their voices. "Cole-boy's been at it a year now," one of them said. "She'll come around eventually. Makes sense, the 2 of them, close in age. He's got money behind him." "Smart girl," the other one said. "Smarter than holding out for nothing." I bought my 50 pounds of compost and didn't say a word to either of them. But I carried it home heavier than it should have weighed. That's when I started pulling back, though I didn't call it that at the time. I called it being sensible. I skipped the next Thursday, told myself I was busy down in the Zinn block, which wasn't exactly a lie, just not the whole truth. The Thursday after that, when I heard her truck on the gravel, I went out and left a folded 20 under a rock on the porch rail, before she'd even gotten the bag out of her cab. Like I was settling a bill instead of standing in a doorway. She didn't take the money. She left it right where it was, and drove off without coming up the steps. I told myself it was the age between us. 27 years to my 54 wasn't a gap, it was a canyon, and a woman that age deserved a man who could still run alongside her, instead of one already counting down the seasons he had left. I told myself it was Diane, that wanting something new felt like packing her things into a box marked done. Both of those reasons sounded true enough when I said them to myself in an empty kitchen. Then I came back from the lower block one evening, tired, hands raw from wire training new chutes along the trellis, and found the latch on my chicken coop fixed. Clean new hinge, fresh wood where the old frame had gone soft and splintered from years of rain. Tucked into the wire mesh was a torn corner of paper, her handwriting quick and unbothered. Wood was rotted through, replaced it. I stood there in the dark with the chickens settling behind the new latch. That little scrap of paper in my hand. And understood that pulling away from her wasn't going to be as simple as leaving $20 under a rock. Word got around fast that Ethan had finally asked her properly. Not just hanging around her stall at the market, but a real invitation. The Sonoma Harvest Festival, the big one they hold every October on the plaza in town. Music and wine pours, and half the valley walking around in flannel, pretending it isn't still 70 degrees out. Hannah told him she'd think about it. She told me the same thing, standing in the kitchen, with her arms crossed. Like she was waiting for me to give her a reason not to. I had the reason sitting right there behind my teeth. I didn't say it. What I said instead was, Ethan's a good match. Steady, you should think about your future. I watched something close behind her eyes when I said it, like a door swinging shut on a room I hadn't even known I was standing in. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You're deciding for me again, she said. Then she picked up her bag and left. And she didn't say goodbye. And for the first time in over a year, the following Thursday came and went without the sound of her truck on my gravel. I stood at the kitchen window, longer than I want to admit, coffee going cold in my hand, listening to a silence I'd gotten too used to living without. I told myself it was for the best. I told myself that for exactly 4 days, until Richard Cole's Mercedes pulled up my driveway on a Tuesday afternoon, polished enough to throw back the sun. He didn't come for wine. He came in a sport coat that cost more than my tractor payment, shook my hand like he was closing on a house, and got straight to it sitting across my own kitchen table. Cole's Harvest Market wants exclusive distribution on Reyes Grove oil, he said. 14 stores. We'd make her a very comfortable woman, Walter. He let that sit a second, like he expected me to nod along. Then he leaned back. There's something bigger on the table, too. I've got a hospitality group out of the city, looking at this whole stretch of Trinity Road. Your 150, her 40, combined into one parcel. Boutique resort. Tasting pavilion, a few dozen guest cottages. The kind of number that retires a man comfortably. I didn't say anything yet. I wanted to hear exactly how far he meant to go. Ethan's fond of her, Richard said. Easy, like he was discussing weather. If things moved along there naturally, this becomes a family matter instead of 2 separate sales. Easier on everyone. You'd be doing the girl a favor, honestly, helping her see the sensible path. I sat very still. Outside the window, the vines were turning that deep red gold they get in mid-October, and I thought about every Thursday morning, every loaf of bread, every fixed latch, and understood all at once that none of it had ever been about Ethan's feelings for her at all. It was about 40 acres and 150 more sitting next to it, and a sun sent out to soften the ground before the bulldozers came behind him. I think you should leave, I said. Richard smiled like I'd told a joke. Think it over. The offer won't sit open forever. He left the same way he'd come in, smooth and unbothered, and I sat at that table a long time after his car was gone, hands flat on the wood, feeling something in my chest go cold, and then very, very clear. I found Hannah, Saturday morning, at the farmer's market. Same folding table, same hand-lettered sign, except this time Richard Cole was already standing 2 feet from her, talking low and confident. And I caught the tail end of it walking up. The smart choice, Hannah. The responsible one. Walter's a good man, but he's sentimental, and sentiment doesn't keep a vineyard solvent forever. A man his age, alone out there, you have to think about what happens when he can't hold on to it anymore. This way nobody loses anything. Hannah's jaw was tight, her hands flat on the table like she was holding herself in place. A small crowd of regulars had slowed near the stalls around us, the way people do in a town small enough that everyone half listens to everyone else's business. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I'm not selling, I said. Not now, not ever to your buyer. I looked at Richard until he stopped smiling. And whatever Hannah decides to do with land her father planted with his own 2 hands, that's hers to decide. Not yours, not your son's, not mine. I reached over and took her hand. Right there, in front of the whole market, just long enough for everyone watching to see it. If anyone in this valley wants to tell Hannah Reyes what to do with her own grove, I said, they can say it to me first. Nobody said anything for a second. Then old Marletta from the cheese stall started clapping, slow, and a couple of the regulars followed. and Richard Cole's face went the color of a man who'd just realized the room wasn't his anymore. "This offer won't stay on the table forever," he said stiff, already turning for his car. "Good," I said. It was never going to be taken. He walked off through the crowd, and nobody moved out of his way faster than they had to. Hannah didn't say a word. She just looked at me with her hand still loose in mine, like she was deciding whether to believe what she'd just watched happen. The wind changed 3 nights later, and in Sonoma that's never just weather. I woke a little after 1 in the morning to a sound I knew too well from other bad Octobers, that dry, rattling push of a Diablo wind coming down off the mountains, hard enough to slap the shutters against the house. By the time I got my boots on and stepped outside, the sky to the east, toward the Mayacamas, had gone the color of a bruise lit low and orange along the ridgeline. My phone buzzed before I'd even crossed the porch. Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. Evacuation warning, Trinity Road corridor. Not an order yet. A warning. The kind that tells you to get ready to lose everything, but not yet exactly when. The power went out 20 minutes later. PG&E cutting the lines on purpose. A safety shutoff, so the grid itself doesn't start the next fire. I stood in my dark kitchen with a flashlight and thought about my own cellar, temperature controlled, now running on nothing. And then I thought about Hannah's walk-in cooler and her cold press equipment and an entire season's harvest of olives, sitting in crates with no refrigeration and a fire, walking down the hills toward both of us. I didn't call first, I just drove. The air on Trinity Road was already thick enough to taste, that bitter char smell that gets into your throat before you ever see flame. I found her in the yard already moving, hauling a sack of feed toward the lower pasture gate, hair stuck flat to her neck with sweat, ash starting to drift down soft and gray, like the world's worst snow. "Goats first," she said, not even surprised to see me, like she'd known I'd come, then the cooler. We didn't waste breath on anything that wasn't necessary. I ran a length of hose down to her lower fence line, and we walked the dairy goats out of the upper pen, away from the ridge, down where the land flattened, and the fire would have less to feed on if it came that far. Then I backed my truck up to her press house and ran a generator line across the property boundary. The same line I used during crush season, when the grid sags under the load, and watched her cooler hum back to life, every crate of olives still safe inside. After that we worked the access road with what we had. I opened the vineyard's drip irrigation valves wide and let the lines run wet along the gravel edge, soaking down the brush on either side. The way growers up and down this valley have done in every bad fire year since I was young enough to be told to stay out of the way. It wouldn't stop a real wall of flame. It might buy time. Time was the only thing either of us had to spend. We sat on the tailgate after, both of us too tired to stand, sirens running thin and far off on Highway 12, the ridge still glowing, but no closer than it had been an hour before. "I almost didn't come Thursdays anymore," Hannah said, not looking at me, eyes on the orange line along the hills. "Not because I stopped wanting to, because I didn't want to keep hoping for something you clearly didn't." I looked down at my hands, raw from the hose coupling, dirt worked into every crease. "I pushed you toward him because I was scared," I said. "Not of you, of the 27 years between us, and because some nights it felt like loving you again meant admitting I was finally done loving her." I didn't know how to hold both of those at once. She didn't say anything right away. Ash kept falling, slow between us. "I didn't lose Diane because I stopped loving her," I said. "And I'm not going to lose you because I'm too scared to start. I don't want separate Thursdays anymore, Hannah. I want this to be real." She turned and looked at me then, soot smudged along one cheekbone, eyes steady the way they'd been on the porch that morning weeks ago. "I told you already," she said. "This is that life." 3 days later, with the warning lifted and the fire contained up in the hills before it ever reached the valley floor, I finally opened the barrel room door. I told myself I was just letting it air out. The truth was I was ready. Diane's clipboard was still on its nail. Her chair still sat where she'd left it, and in the bottom drawer of her little writing desk, I found a folder of old correspondence I'd never gone looking for. Letters from years back. The same Cole Properties letterhead, the same pitch. Richard Cole had tried this exact deal once before. On my father and on Diane, back when I was too young to be in the room for it. Diane's own handwriting was in the margins of one letter, sharp and unimpressed. "He's sending his nephew around to court the Hargrove girl next door. Same play. Soften the neighbor up with a romance, then make the land offer feel like family business instead of a sale. Watch for it if he ever tries this again. She'd seen it coming 20 years before I had. I brought the folder to Hannah, and she brought something of her own. Emails Ethan had forwarded her without thinking much of it. Back before any of this started. His father's actual investor correspondence about the Trinity Road parcel and softening the Sinclair holdout. Together we took both to the County Planning Commission meeting the following week, and to the Farm Bureau office on Cleveland Avenue, and laid out a pattern 20 years wide, with 2 generations of the same family running it. The rezoning application Richard had quietly filed got tabled on the spot, pending review into what the commission chair called, dryly, voluntary land offers obtained under questionable pretenses. Ethan didn't fight any of it. He came to Hannah's stand the next Saturday, hands in his pockets, and told her flatly that he hadn't known how far his father meant to take it, and that he was sorry for the part he'd played without asking enough questions. "You should have asked," Hannah said. "I know," he said, and left it at that, which was more honest than anything Richard Cole had said to either of us in a month. Spring came back soft that year, the way it does after a bad fire season, like the valley itself was apologizing. The smoke damage turned out lighter than we'd feared. A few scorched fence posts along the upper ridge, nothing the land wouldn't grow back over by summer. Hannah's olive trees came into bloom right on schedule, and her oil, instead of sitting on a shelf in one of Richard Cole's 14 stores, went out under a fair, non-exclusive contract she signed with a small co-op of Sonoma Valley restaurants, who wanted the real thing, not a logo. She negotiated every line of that deal herself, same as she'd negotiated everything else in her life. We were married that May, down in the lower block by the creek, under the old oak that's older than either of our family's claims to this valley. No resort investors. No hospitality consultants with clipboards. Just Pete Alvarez in his one good shirt. A handful of neighbors who'd known us both longer than they'd known the gossip about us, and Ethan Cole standing near the back, there on his own, genuinely glad for once, instead of calculating. I opened the barrel room for good that same spring. Diane's chair is still in the corner where she always kept it, and her clipboard still hangs on its nail, harvest dates in her own hand. I didn't take any of it down. I just built around it. A long tasting counter where Sinclair Estate wine sits beside Reyes Grove oil, poured and tasted together, one valley's worth of work under both our names. People drive up Trinity Road for it now, the same road they used to pass, without slowing down. 2 years after that, our daughter was born on a clear October morning, not unlike the one Hannah first knocked on my kitchen door. Hannah named her before I could even suggest anything. Diane Inez Sinclair. She didn't ask if it was all right. She just told me, the same steady way she'd told me everything else that mattered, and I understood it wasn't a question that needed my permission. Some evenings now I stand on that same porch, watching the light go gold and low across both properties. Vine rows on one side, olive rows on the other, no fence line marking where one stops and the other starts anymore. I used to think loving Diane meant the rest of my life had to stay exactly the way she left it, frozen behind a locked door, so I wouldn't have to feel the size of what I'd lost. Hannah taught me different. A man's heart isn't a vineyard with only one row in it. There's always room to plant something new, without tearing out what came before. Thank you for listening to this story from Porch Stories.